Reinforcement strategy to me is take what you've learned and just apply it, practice it, and eventually certify on it so you can actually move with that learning on your own and benefit from it. The best companies I know are ones that integrate any type of learning into the day in the life. Today's learning is not yesterday's learning. And if you're going to succeed today, you're going to have to convince or change the attitude or the definition of training in that leader's mind. What I mean by accountable coaching is coaching to ensure that that knowledge is in play. Accountable is kind of the result of the coaching. I think that that's important, and it drives culture. But none of this is going to matter if you don't have
Hello. This is Michael Ocean, founder and CEO at SellMeThisPen. I have my great friend Jay Shephard on the call. Super excited for this conversation. Today we're going to dive deep into reinforcement in sales. So before doing that, Jay, it's so good to have you on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and just introduce yourself?
I'm actually trying to, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, how long have we known each other now? A couple of years at this point, yes. Right? And it's been so fun to watch your business take off. That is, and from those early conversations you and I had to where it is today, I got to tell you, my brother, I'm so happy for you. I really am. So
I always appreciate you, man. We bug you a lot with feedback sessions, but again, it seems like things are working. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's good to see. So, I've been in the sales game. I'll call it the game, for lack of a better term, for a while, a couple decades actually, and more specific to that, I've had that opportunity to get in the enterprise side, especially when it comes to software as a service, but dive in deeper as to the breaking point between salespeople that are really, really good and those that are marginal and those that stay with the game and those that don't. And there are some very interesting characteristics behind that, but also the company has a lot to do with that as well today, which we'll talk about with reinforcement strategies.
Nice. So for those of us who don't know much about this topic, can you just define reinforcement in a sales context?
Yeah. So, and have you ever noticed there's multiple definitions for the same word? So I think it's great that you lead with that because it could mean a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, reinforcement to me is as much about proving that what knowledge transfer took place happened as much as it is getting into that day in the life integration. So a reinforcement strategy to me is take what you've learned and just apply it, practice it, and eventually certify on it so you can actually move with that learning on your own and benefit from it.
So let me ask you this question because for me, sometimes I go on LinkedIn and I learn something new, or I read a book or listen to a podcast, take a little information from here and there. And maybe if I again have a situation that I go on a call with a client, I can apply it right away and see how people react, and either just add it to my workflow as part of just an overall practice, or just get rid of it. This is not working for me, or let's just analyze and see what works and what not. How do we make sure that people actually have this opportunity to apply what they learned right away? What are the ways that companies are doing it today that you've seen success?
The best companies I know, the ones that I've either consulted with, maybe even worked for, are ones that integrate any type of learning into the day in the life. I mean, let's be honest, Michael, selling's hard. It takes a lot longer time than people realize. It's much more challenging than I think a lot of people and even leaders realize. And so learning is a distraction. I mean, if you have X amount of time to get something done, but 40% of your day is wrapped up into administrivia kind of work, and now you add learning on top of that, it's really hard. So the best companies I know focus in on how can we disrupt the flow of the seller and integrate learnings, whether they're micro learnings, 3, 4, 5 minutes, but whatever it is it's integrated into the day in the life, so it's less of a disruption. I've worked with some companies, interestingly enough, that said, well, we're going to do 10% a week of your week, and it's going to be dedicated to learning. Love that in theory, but it doesn't work that way, right? Because how many times have you sat down, you wanted to read a book, for example, and you're reading through the first half of the page, and you're going, okay, my mind's on something else. You can't just dedicate a block of time. I just haven't found that to be successful. But some of the best companies, they integrate into the day in the life, and then they use technology. Technology, I mean, certainly AI, you're hearing all about it. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it in this session. But when it comes to the best companies, they're doing day in the life, they're using technology, and they're just integrating it so it's not so much of a distraction in the world of the seller each week.
That makes a lot of sense. And to your point, you're already busy with so many things, like part being administrative, tasks, part, selling itself. And then when training or learning gets involved, is this really a priority? Or maybe it is or not, but do the end users see the same value as us, let's say people in enablement? So let me ask you this, Jay. If you're looking at use cases, like for example, if you're onboarding new hires, so that's a different story because people want to get, ramped quickly.
Yeah.
They want to get into, on field and start selling and making their commission. But how about like our current workforce? So if you're getting to, let's say, a company that you already inherited a team and they need some upskilling in any area, it could be discovery, it could be negotiation, each part of, sales process. How should we make sure that we don't distract them and we give them enough material so we can apply that change without being forceful? For example, for use cases like onboarding,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to help people see value in training and getting all this learnings and knowledge and apply it in the day to day because it's during the ramp time, right? They want to learn. But what if we have reps that have been with the company for quite some time now, but we know we need to upskill them somehow?
Reminds me of a situation I had years ago. The top seller of this company, I mean, this is a guy in the technology world, was making over $1 million US a year in sales. And he was asked to come in and participate in a training program, opportunity management type of training program. I happened to be the one facilitating the course, and I heard about this guy ahead of time. And so I'd love to tell you I was so brilliant. I did this in advance, thought about it. Honestly, I kind of winged it, and it worked. Here's the story. So this guy walks in. I heard already about how talented he was, and he would probably be a distraction in the class. But it was such an important class because it was going to set the tone for the even larger rollout of this opportunity management program that I was facilitating. So first thing I did is I pulled him off the side. I said, listen, first of all, congratulations. You've had a phenomenal year. I think it's awesome. I think we could learn a lot from you, and I'd like you to help co-teach this today. Well, first of all, there was elements in the training that he did not know and didn't really have any experience in. But he bid at that. And he said, absolutely. Yes, I'd be more than happy to help. Now, I wasn't going to let this guy out to dry. I was never going to I wanted him to, though, put color to the stories and put some more meat on the bone, from a facilitation point of view. And it worked out really well, except for one point. It was a 3-day session. In day two in the morning, he comes to me, he goes, listen, I'm going to be gone for the morning. I said, oh, okay, where are you going? He goes, well, I'm going down to the port of Miami to pick up my Bentley that just came in off the boat. You work with what you can work with.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
But honestly, to answer your question directly, that enablement professional who has that experienced superstar that comes in, make them part of the learning. And give them, stoke their ego, if you would. And I honestly, it worked. It worked really well.
So what do you think? Like, this is really interesting because, again, as a high-performing rep who making enough money to, pick up his brand new Bentley that day, I think he's extremely busy. His mind into selling. Like, this is my job. I'm a closer. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to go hunt. I'm going to go talk to clients. This is my job. How do you really get them to be interested in being part of enablement? Because in theory, it's easy. But for someone experienced like yourself, I'm sure you have a way to kind of like convince them, because I assume not everybody's going to be as open as, that guy in the story. So you tell me, some of those tricks to use on some of these that are performing.
But I think it's important to note here, this guy wasn't as good as he thought he was. And there's some humbling that goes on to play. I'll tell you a backstory even further here. This guy closed a big account. There it is. And so he closed a big account. He didn't do so well on some of his medium-sized accounts. It's not like this guy was closing 9 out of 10 deals.
Mm-hmm.
But what he did do that I'll never forget, I thought this was a great point that he brought up during the training. He said, look, I want to make, and I can't remember what he said, well, he made over $1 million that year, but let's make this easy. Let's say I want to make $100,000 US a year. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, what he would do is he would reverse engineer and say, okay, if I'm going to make $100,000, what does that equal out? $100 an hour. I can't remember what the numbers are, right? But he says, I'm only going to do $100 an hour work. My question is that client or that prospect worth $100 an hour of my time? And I thought that was a fascinating way to kind of reverse engineer that. So he taught me that. But again, I go back to how do you get these people involved? First of all, their ego needs to be humbled, and they will be humbled when you give them an opportunity to co-teach. Again, I would never leave anybody out to dry. No way.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually you need that individual to further drive the credibility. I'll even give them credit as part of the course. So anytime you do, if you're doing your prep as a sales enablement leader, you're doing prep and customizing it for the day in the life of the seller, go to some of these high performers and say, you know what, let's make this our course. Let's make this something that we collectively build. I'll even name it after you, or I'll name this module after you. It's like a sandwich, you know.
I love that.
But at the end of the day, it strokes their ego, and actually, it's a great trade because you get a lot of value out of their experience as well.
This is really fascinating. You mentioned two important things. That first and foremost, let's focus on micro learning, so reps can add it to the day to day. They can practice as well. They're doing their work. We can leverage technology. We can give them tiny little nuggets instead of like rolling out the entire, let's say, the book of playbook or anything that you call. And then leverage internal resources. Get the high performing reps involved, the ones that can actually help show the value behind these training sessions to help you basically, what do you call it? Is it co-coach, co-training?
I'll do a co-teach, or a co-coach
Co-teach.
is certainly good too.
Yeah, there you go. So tell me now about some of the practices that you've seen, done wrong, and companies like running these sessions or these practices not in the best way, and how to fix them.
I'm no longer in a full-time enablement role. I now consult around that space, but I have had enough experiences leading enablement teams that I don't care how good you are as the sales enablement leader or even your team. At the end of the day, nothing matters if you don't have the buy-in of the senior leadership. And here's the thing, senior leaders, and I get this, I so get this. So many senior leaders that I've worked with over the years came up through the old days of training, right? You kind of checked the box and you went off, and really you had poor to lackluster results of that training. And so that reputation or that attitude or that definition of training follows that leader, well, as that person becomes manager and then eventually into an executive role. Here's the challenge with that. Today's learning is not yesterday's learning. And if you're going to succeed today, you're going to have to convince or change the attitude or the definition of training in that leader's mind. Here's how you do that. Number one, you talk about business cases, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's, I think, the best way I know how to communicate to an executive leader is that evidence. But Michael, I think what's most important here is we need to step back and look at how people are measured, how they are metriced. What is sitting on that executive or executive team's plate that they've got to move? I call it insight mapping, right? What's the company's goals? What are the pressures that are preventing those goals at the executive level from happening? And for that matter, what can we do in enablement to move those goals forward and relieve those pressures? That to me is such an important connection that is so often missed. What we tend to do is we have training and we listen to a manager or we listen to a rep, which by the way is important, but you're not going to get a cultural change. You're not going to get the I guess, strength and value so necessary to make enablement work if you don't have the buy-in of that executive.
Mm, that's absolutely correct. And even when we work with clients and they come, let's say, through the enablement lens, they come and see, okay, we need this training because we're onboarding this many people, or the numbers are down. But then the question is, what is it that we are changing about the business? What business problem we are solving for the executives so we can get this alignment from the get-go? And one of the main questions that always, pop up in my mind is, how do we really communicate the efficacy of our practices as enablers so executives can really understand why they need to pay attention
Mm-hmm.
to the business plan in front of them from enablement? Do you have any examples or any stories that you build that alignment with executive team when you introduce something completely new? So whether it be tools or new training session, something new that they never tried. Like how do you build that alignment from the get go?
First thing that comes to mind is velocity metrics. You heard the velocity equation, which essentially is velocity is all about maximizing throughput. In other words, maximizing productivity in a day, as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it comes to terms in sales, when you take four metrics, and I find this fascinating how this math works out, and I've tested it so many times, but it works. On the top half of the equation, you look at the number of sales opportunities, qualified sales opportunities, average deal rate or average deal size, excuse me, and the third one is win rate.
Mm-hmm.
Take those three factors, right? And then the denominator is sales cycle time. Well, here's what's fascinating. If you take enablement, right, and you connect it to any of those four metrics, you're going to improve what they call velocity, right? So, for example, if you improve your number of deals that you qualify, average deal rate, average deal size, excuse me, and win rate, if you up it by 10% and you lower your sales cycle by 10%, you'll actually maximize the amount of sales effectiveness time by 47%. I mean, it's fascinating. You do the math as you do that. But if you're going to get the attention, you need to show that equation and make it part of the sales enablement mantra, if you would. Any of those four metrics that you touch will impact sales effectiveness overall. And I think those are great measures to work with right off of the bat. But then here's the other one: it's qualitative metrics. And these are the I'll call them loose or soft metrics, like culture, right? Or something along the lines of the ability to communicate more effectively with your customer, or resources that you get from marketing. Those are metrics, but those tend to be softer metrics, and they can all be impacted. Find ways to impact the important metrics of the executives, and I got to tell you something, you'll get the attention that you need.
Very smart. You know what this reminds me of? I had another guest on the show, my good friend Graham Pitches, and he shared about a strategy called the domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
Said exactly what you mentioned. Like really focus on things that matter to bottom line at the end of the day. But in order just to make it believable, let's get 2-3 reps that are more open to
Exactly
new
right.
things.
Yeah.
Build the case, send them directly to CRO, and make them look like superstar. And then other reps, other managers, kind of like want to be part of these waves. But I wanted to hear from your perspective, how can we make this believable for the leaders? Because yes, you're smart, you get the insight, you say, hey, this is the way we are going to impact, let's say, sales velocity.
Yeah.
But how do you build that trust up front so they can say, yes, let's give that a go and let's give it a try?
Two things: results, bar none. That's it. You either close or you don't close. You either improve that metric or you don't improve that metric. But if you're going to change culture, if you're going to, and I say change culture to eventually influence executives or those key decision makers or key players, what I've always done is I go out to my managers that I'm close with. And, we all have relationships, those that are really, really tight and close. You got others that are a little bit more familiar. I look to the people that I surround myself around that will listen to me, that trust me, and I trust them. And I'll ask point blank, what who's most influential on your team? Who do the other reps listen to?
Mm-hmm.
And once I identify that, I'll build that group, that advisory team, and kind of stoke to that ego. But more important to that, apply what they have experienced into whatever learning I'm trying to do. You get those two factors together, you change the culture, you get the result. Guess what? You get the attention of that executive. As long as you tie it to what they're most measured on. And by the way, that is an awesome question to ask. You can't just ask, for example, go up to the senior executive, tell me how you're measured, right? You can't do that. You got to earn the right to do that. But it's also, Michael, a great question to ask your customer. You want to understand, what's important to them. But help me to understand, how are you measured here? I mean, what does success look like to you? How does that impact you? Now, I got to tell you something. I could do that maybe in the Midwest, in New York. Whoa, that may not work, right? So you can't just ask that question. You got to earn the right to ask that question. But getting to that level of intimacy, if you would, can go a long way to getting that executive approval and the cultural change you need to succeed.
Very, very interesting. So what I'm hearing is you start with people that you know within each team. It could be a rep, it could be the manager, it could be the director. And then basically get the buy-in, build a plan before going to the executive. So you start from, button-up approach, if you will. Is that correct?
That is correct. But there's another thing you could do here as well. And I've done this in 3 different companies that I've worked for. Or is I've actually, in fact, I'm working with a company right now as a consultant where I'm introducing what I'm about ready to share with you. I call it simply the sales cafe.
Okay.
And what the cafe simply is, I don't care if you've got 200 salespeople, if you have 20 or 5, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, what you do is you take a topic. You hear from the sales organization those individual painful challenges that a seller is up against all the time, and you put it in the form of a question. Right. So let's say you need to delay the sale because you have an upgrade that's coming in your next product run, but the customer wants to buy from your competitor now. Right? Mm-hmm. How do I slow down the sale? Talk about counter to what we've ever been taught, right? Mm-hmm. We're slowing down the sale. So you put that in the form of a question, right? And then you come up with 20 answers in a collective world. So what you're doing is the cafe, you meet once a month. Everybody attends. You ask that in the form of a question. Then you break it into small groups. You can do this on Zoom, Teams, whatever. And then they come up with answers. Now, here's what's interesting. First 4 or 5 answers, they come rolling off the tongue. It's what we do all the time. The next 3, 4, that's kind of hard. The last 10 are like pulling water from a rock, right? But that's where your creative tendencies tend to go. And that's that out-of-box thinking. Well, here's what happens. Not only do you get new, creative, fresh approaches, salespeople learn from each other, right? And because they learn from each other, they own that solution. And because of this dialogue that's happening, all of a sudden, senior leadership takes notice. And that's exactly what's happened every time I've introduced the Sales Cafe. We run it once a month. The salespeople are really as I say, the expertise is not in the front of the room, it's in the room. Mm-hmm. And it's an opportunity for peers to, kind of have that internal competitiveness, right? Where they want to contribute because of the value that brings within their peer group.
This is really cool. So do you, before running this monthly, let's say, sales cafes, how do you pick the topics? How do you come up with the topics? I'm just curious.
Great question again. So I rely, yes, there are times where I need to pick a topic and I will put that out as one of the choices, right? But honestly, it's that feedback loop that you get with managers and salespeople saying, what is it that's challenging you? And when you hear kind of repeated issues, it just kind of floats to the top, and that's how we go. That's awesome. Let me give you an example. I worked for a cybersecurity company that Microsoft was the reseller of this cybersecurity product, and everything was going great. Well, one day, Microsoft decided to compete against this company, and it represented about 80% of their sales. And so we had to move on that very fast. And we came up with some creative approaches that seemed to work, but it was still pretty damaging. And so, but we took a little bit of dent or chunk out of that change. It worked in that regard. It didn't change everything, but at least we took a chunk out of it. And that was all sales led. Managers and leaders took notice.
Interesting. So you'd really try to always be close to the front line and see, what's happening, what they need today, rather than just let's plan it for tomorrow. We'll just do some best practices. Let's just be in the front lines with our team, whether it's just a sales rep or a manager, to understand, where their struggles are today. And the example that you shared is really fascinating because you notice this change is happening. Like, this is the focus. We don't have the luxury just to think about something hypothetical. We need to fix this problem today and right away.
I don't care if you are a vice president of sales enablement or director or manager or however you all are structured in your respective areas. The moment you no longer listen is the moment you quickly become irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And this is not about being buddies. I mean, at the end of the day, your job is to help drive execution and effectiveness. And sometimes the people that you're working with don't want that. Why? Because they're going to be called out that they're not nearly as effective as they would like or give the impression to be. And so accountability, those types of things, they're not going to happen, and you're not going to get the respect from an enablement point of view if you are not there on the front lines, period.
This is so true. And I wanted to ask a tactical question. Mm-hmm. So enablement, typically we have smaller teams. Like, that's the reality. Like, you get less budget, you have smaller teams, and you have so many people to work with. Like, especially right now, we're talking about revenue enablement. Obviously, you got your sales, you get customer success, you got marketing, you have to work with product. How do you manage your time? And how do you plan? If you maybe have a process in place that helps you basically be in the front lines and have this view of things without, give your full attention to certain teams, because it's very challenging. You have multiple teams to work with as a revenue enablement professional. Is there a process that people can follow just to make sure that you always, have a sight of, things without, wasting so much time?
Two things come to mind. Number one, AI. Use AI where you can to reinforce. I think that's really important. It's probably the best way you can divide and conquer, if you would, in regards to if you have a small team, you got a big responsibility.
Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With SellMeThisPen AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at SellMeThisPen.ai.
The other thing that I think is important that I learned painfully, I might add, is to learn to say no. Sales enablement, sadly, is one that has to constantly fight for its reputation, because so many people want to put it down in this little corner like it's a waste of time training exercise when you're driving revenue. And so look at your chart or look at ways that you can make sure on the front end people understand what it is that you do. But divide and conquer using AI types of tools, I think, are really, really important. The other thing that I would encourage people to consider is a multi-pronged approach to learning. And so what I mean by that is I introduced something at last company I worked with that worked really well. That was taking microlearning, taking a topic, right, breaking it down into 4 6-minute chunks, right? That was done by self-study. We had just a video that we could do it, and it worked, and some materials, they learned how to do it. It was called Learn, Practice, Apply, Certify. So you got the learning element where they're learning. So it's replaced formal teaching. So it's recorded learning, right? And then we go into, we call them huddles. So these are these little practice huddles that are led by other people in the company. It could be other salespeople, for example. It could be a sales engineer. It could be whatever that topic is, having some resident expert, if you would, lead a small group conversation. What does that do? Well, you better make sure you've actually learned it or been exposed to it. And it gives you an opportunity to practice it. Apply means you're actually using it out in the field. And you could have possibly coaching or reinforcement through a manager. That's one way you could do it. You could go back into a small group and discuss the experiences that you had. So you got to learn, practice, apply, and then the last one's certify. I'm huge on this. Certify is one of those watered down terms now that it's unfortunate that it's there, but I would encourage everybody to reinvigorate what we mean by certification. I'm a big believer in whiteboard demonstration that you actually know what you have just been taught. So you learn it through your self-study, you practice it, you apply it. Now you're going to demonstrate it in front of possibly 2 or 3 people. It could be your peers. It could be a couple of SMEs. It could be you as the enablement leader. And you ask them questions and they actually write it out on a board. How would you handle this objection? You could draw the person, here's the objection, and then you give 2 or 3 different ways you could do it. Versus a verbal where they're looking at the screen, but they're not telling you they've got all their notes on the screen. Even though you're looking at them, they got the notes right there. You can't fake putting something on a whiteboard. It works.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? You might look at this as a very old school method, if you will. But to your point, you cannot fool something that is in front of you, right? Like you put things on that whiteboard, and you have one shot, one opportunity in front of you because people are seeing. To your point, you cannot just fake it. This is really, really fascinating. So let me ask you something about certification because I agree with you. It's very important. And your approach is really unique. I never heard like actually just go in front of people and teach it back to a group. Would you say managers and leaders should get certified before sellers, or should be other way around? Or what's the best practice here?
Man, I really love that question because we get it bass backwards, as they call it, right? You're right. If you're going to drive cultural change, you're going to have the leaders use the vocabulary, be able to coach you, or at least say, here's something you might want to consider, when that rep ends up going through the training. So absolutely, yes, you put your key players through that on the front end because they will help reinforce it and drive the culture. Also, by the way, too, it communicates something else that's very interesting. And that is, oh, by the way, we take this serious, right? Versus, I'll wing it, right? No, if your manager, your leader starts asking you questions or starts to quiz you somewhat or demonstrates in the sales call that they're using that skill, you're going to take notice very quickly.
That is so true. And I think based on my experience, whether working with clients or in past life selling, people pay more attention when the executive support is there. Like if this CR send a message on Slack, hey guys, This is happening. It's mandatory. There's no dictatorship here, but everybody needs to improve because we have the numbers and results in front of us and there's transparency. And this is a must do. There's no question behind it. People take this more seriously rather than someone, let's say within the team, a manager really try best to, align the team for, training or practice session. It comes from the top. Everybody listens, at least based on my experience. I don't know that. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. And by the way, too, I should mention, another fun thing you could do is actually create competitions amongst each of the sales managing teams.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Yeah. If you got a little budget, you can play with it. As a former sales guy myself, right? I mean, we are all competitive by nature, and if one team is beating the other team, leaderboards will do that, right? You can include those in leaderboards. There's all kinds of things you could do to drive that change.
Yeah, yeah. And these are really interesting, approaches. Like it seems simple, but it's really effective because regardless of the age and how much money we are making, as sellers, the fact that we have this like competitive attitude toward life, and we always want to be on the top. So to your point, we can just quickly, pump people just to really get on board. Look, Jay, my last question: if companies can do only one activity from today to 1 year to come, to improve long-term learning, what would it be and why?
Accountable coaching. And what I mean by accountable coaching is coaching to ensure that that knowledge is in play, it's being used, right? Accountable is kind of the result of the coaching. I think that that's important, and it drives culture. But none of this is going to matter if you don't have executive support and alignment. And that comes down to what is it you're teaching or what is it you're trying to drive, and
Mhm.
connecting it back to what matters most to the organization. If you can show that connection, managers, leaders will come to your side and support you. I mean, at the end of the day, culture is culture. And the only way to change culture is to change culture. And
Mhm.
that, I think, is what's missing so often as we do these checkbox exercises, not not to just do it, but unfortunately just to do it because they're not going anywhere. You got to find a way of getting that support from the executive leadership and those that matter in the company. Then you'll get your change.
There we go. There you have it. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks very much, Jay, for joining me today. If someone wants to reach out to you, can they and how?
So I run a what we call a sales value advisory. So what I do essentially today is set up value advisory teams. So how can we as an organization respond to our prospects and our clients with value solutions? In other words, all hands on deck. How can we truly differentiate versus all of our competition? The reason I gave you that front end is the fact that I actually am recreating a website. And so the best way to reach me is via LinkedIn at Jay Shephard Achieve ROI.
Nice. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this podcast today, and I see you next time. Bye for now.